This time on the Prop Master, we keep it short and sweet. This is part 2 of a video that we've already started. We're working on these thrusters here. This part of the video is going to be about building this thruster, which is made from a kit. But sprinkled throughout, there's going to be some information that's going to be important working on the thruster if you're building it yourself. Now, with keeping with the theme of going fast here, just try to remember everything that I've said about interacting with the video and think that I'm saying it now. So basically, please leave a comment, interact with the video. And with that said, let's get back to work. So the first thing you want to do with these is to kind of look over them and see if there's any spots where there's just some plastic sticking up. Like you can see that this should be flat to match up with the other half. And if there's like a glob right there or in these little half circle areas here, that's really important because it's going to be a lot easier to clean any globs of plastic off of this while it's, you have access to it right here. Then when we put these together, it'll be harder to get to, make sure it's flat. So if there's any, you can see that these are pretty rough. This doesn't really matter, it gets covered up. But if you see that kind of stuff around here, then now's the time to clean that up. And these are the two pieces that we're going to put together first. And you can see that these are, this will be really easy to put together, but then we've got a fair amount of cleanup to do with it. Now to glue these together, you could use the thick or the gel super glue or CA glue. I think that would work fine. I can't remember what I actually used when I did this, but I'm going to use the construction grade hot glue just because if there's any gaps or any slop in the way these go together, that hot glue, how thick it is, will sort of fill that gap. But if you don't have that and you want to go with the super glue or crazy glue, make sure you use the gel just because it has more body to it. Once again, you'll be more likely to fill any gap that's there. And I'm going to go all the way around the edges and then also hit these little parts that stick up. And then just stick them together. Now you need to make sure that you get these lined up so that they are even, and squeeze them well on both ends so that if there's any, make sure that it's flat here and flat in the back. And then I'm going to, while I still can, easily wipe away the excess. So I think that just grabbing the two sides of this and making sure that they are even with each other is the easiest way to make sure that everything's lined up. But you can also take this piece, which is, the part that attaches, and make sure that it fits in there, and that will kind of keep it in the right place. Now we're just going to let this cure for about an hour. Just to make sure that, you could probably get away with, 5 or 10 minutes to be honest, but I'm going to make sure that it's not going to move. So honestly, yeah, about 10 minutes. And I'm going to drop it into here. That will make sure that it's, nothing's pressing on it anywhere, and we'll kind of hold it together. So we'll be back in about 10 minutes. So while we're waiting for this to cool off completely, let's grab this piece. This is the part that connects the thruster to the jetpack itself. So I'm just going to take this and I'm going to run it on this 80 grit sandpaper, which is wrapped around the same pipe that, the same tube that this is made of, so that it'll fit perfectly. And so while trying to keep this as 90 degrees to that as I can, I'm just going to sand that curve into there. And what I think I might do is I might put some lines on there which will help me visualize exactly how it's lined up. Okay, and I didn't measure anything, I just sort of did that so that it looked like it was pretty much lined up. And then it also helps me, I can put my fingers above those. So I'm just looking on here and yeah, I can see that it's pretty close to the edge here, but it's sticking, this edge is sticking up a little bit. So I'm going to add a little bit more pressure on this, you know, this side over here. And that looks like it's fitting on there pretty good. I can maybe get my thumbnail on that side a little bit more. So let's keep going. So I'm also going to use these marks to help me when I line up putting this all together. And it looks like maybe I'm leaning a little bit that way. So I'm going to put a little pressure on the back of it. And let me find my 1, 2, 3 block or a square so I can check and see how square that is. Okay, and that looks pretty darn square. So I think we're done. This should be cooled off adequately by now. I don't think it would, if I tried really hard, maybe I could pry it apart, but it's not going to go anywhere just through casual touching it. But we're not quite ready to glue this piece onto there, because before we do that, we need to drill a hole. This is a lag screw, which just means it has a screw type body with a hex head on it. And this is what we're going to use to attach this onto there, you know, the same way we're using that lag bolt through here. Sort of the opposite. We're putting a nut on here, whereas this we're going to screw into there. This is 1.5 inches. This is a 1.5 inch lag screw, which is what, 38 millimeters. That's just the length of it. And the diameter doesn't really matter as long as it's not like a huge lag screw. I think if you get a lag screw that's this length, it's going to be roughly this width. And then you want to measure the shaft of this lag screw, which is basically not counting the threads themselves. So the shaft of the screw without the threads. And then you want to drill a hole that size in here. Now I'm going to use the drill press, but honestly in this particular one you don't really have to do that. As you can see, if I can get that to, hopefully you can see in there, there is some, you know, a little indentation in there, so that's going to guide your drill pretty well if you want to do this by hand. It wouldn't hurt to measure and mark the center of this, and then you could go in this way a little bit and then finish out through here so that it would be centered all the way through. But I'm going to use the drill press, and let's go ahead and drill that hole real quick. Okay, we're over here at the drill press, and this is the bit that I'm going to use. And you notice that we don't have the little hole here now. I'm going to show you how to go ahead and do that, because as it turns out, this little recess is also 1 inch, which is the size of the spade bit that I have. So I can easily just hold that up there and it'll find the center pretty easily. But I didn't really show you how to do this in the first half of the video, so let's go ahead and do it now. I have my bit in there, and I'm going to bring this down until it goes, you know, this goes down as far as it will go, and I'm going to set this so that it's just touching that, so that I can know that I'll cut all the way through this piece. Now I'm going to take that out. I'm going to put it in my 1 inch bit, And the reason why you wanted to set the level of this the way I just did is so that you can actually put this larger bit in. Because what happens a lot of times is you'll set it all up for that first bit and then you can't fit this in that space. So I set this to have the maximum space that would still work with this bit. And I'm just going to drill that 1-inch hole. And the point of this is so that I can guarantee that this is perfectly centered with the chuck here. And it doesn't have to be very deep. Okay. Now this will sort of lock right into the middle. I'm going to make sure that that will go all the way through. And now I'm going to turn this on and make sure that that end, you know, if I don't have enough of this in the chuck, it'll wobble. So let's make sure that doesn't wobble. Oh, looks steady. So now I can lock that in place and drill a hole directly through the middle. I'm trying to do this without blocking you. Just gonna clean off some of this. Try to see how I can do this where you can actually see what's going on still. So I went in very slowly just in case the hole that was already there was just a little bit off. I wanted to make sure this would still go in the middle and not deflect into that area. And I've got a hole all the way through. Now we can attach this to the other piece. Okay, we're back. There is one thing that I did off camera just because I can't do it in front of the camera very well, but I'll show you. I've taken my lag screw and I've taken this piece with the hole, and you want to make sure you go in on this curved part that goes up against the pipe, and holding it as straight as you can, kind of get it threaded or to start to bite, and then take your socket or open, you know, a box wrench or socket, whatever you're going to use, and start screwing this in there. And the reason why I can't really do this on screen is because it gets really difficult and you've really got to hold on to this tight. If it gets super tight, then it's time to back it off, because you're trying to cut these threads basically into the, you know, into this piece. So go ahead and back it off. You could use a, you know, a tap, but I don't think that these wood screw threads would fit any tap that I'm aware of. So keep going. And especially as you start to get toward the end, it starts to get really difficult. But keep going until you get this all the way through. You could obviously put this into a vise, but it would probably cut into it. You can always file those and sand them afterwards. And I'm basically going to do this until this is, you know, right up against there. I don't want that to start digging in there, just because it's going to be very difficult to get it out. But you can see that this has gone through with a, you know, a few of the threads sticking out. And the reason why you want to do this now is because I'm not sure that the glue that we use, whatever you use to glue it onto here, will be strong enough to handle that much rotational force. Super glue is really good at stopping things from pulling apart, but not so good as shearing or, you know, this torque. It's not the strongest at that. And one trick would be to use one of these to do what I just did, and then get a completely different screw, lag screw, to actually use, because believe it or not, that plastic can kind of dull the threads on this screw. Okay, our hot glue should be hot by now. You could use super glue on this, obviously. It's just up to you. I'm going to use hot glue because I want to kind of fill in any imperfection. Oh, by the way, you need to take note of this. I made this one, so this part's facing forward and this is on the right side. So on this one, I need to make sure to put this on the left side. Otherwise, you'll have two of the same thruster and it won't work. You'll have to make one of them face backwards or something. So I can just kind of set that on there and make sure that it fits well all the way around, and it does. You can kind of use the seam here to line up your little lines to make sure that everything looks good there. Just to be sure, when I actually do this, I'll take this and hold it in place. Now you've got the hole in this, so any excess glue here is going to go into that hole, but that's okay. We're going to deal with that in a minute. Okay, so I'm going to put my glue in this little, you can kind of see here that there is a kind of a little stair step there. I'm not sure you can see that actually. And I'm going to put my glue around that and then a ring around this. So I want to make sure that it's got a good seal between this and this, as well as this edge. The reason why I want to make sure to get that edge is because this gap, or this, this recess, may be deeper than this step. So I want to make sure that I've got as much contact area as possible. Okay, so I'm going to kind of shove that on there, and then I'm going to take this piece and hold them both like this. If I can do this where you can see. Make sure that this is flat against that, and then get this on there where everything is nice and smooth everywhere. And just let that sit for a minute. And then after that, I'll clean off the still soft hot glue. So it's not really important that these little lines here line up perfectly with this. What's important is that this is completely secure. It fits tightly or properly all around that. But then this is, straight up and down, and this is straight up and down. Okay. I'm just using my fingernail, and I'm going to remove what I can. I'm trying to be careful not to pry this off. And the hot glue kind of fills in some of the gaps there. At the very end, we're still going to have to go in with some putty to smooth everything out completely. And you don't want, hot glue sticking out, because it's, we can't sand that flat. Okay, so this one I will let sit a full hour, just because we've got to come back and drill another hole, or follow the hole we drilled here and drill into this. And I want to make sure that, first of all, that this thing is completely cured, so it doesn't split apart when we drill that hole, and that this doesn't get deflected in any way. It's been about 10 minutes. And while we're waiting for this to go ahead and cool at least an hour, probably a little bit longer before we start doing anything else to this, let's go ahead and attach this top piece to the cone here. So I'm going to take my hot glue, and I'm going to start out by just putting some hot glue across this top edge. And you want this to line up. You get these little cutouts down here at the bottom. You want the space in between those cutouts to line up with the one of these bottom pieces here. Okay. And let's give that, a minute. I just have, this is the thruster cone from a set that I ordered that was 3D printed, which looks great, but is considerably small. I'm just using that to hold this up. You could use almost anything. Just something that's going to hold, you know, this up upside down. Let's get a little taller. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try and reinforce this by putting hot glue all over. I can't really fill this up because this will just fill into the sphere section, but I'm going to get glue all the way up around these sides here. Then kind of hit it on the sides of the cone and then let it run down onto the piece of the sphere that's sticking in there. And even if that then runs into the hole, that'll all just give it lots of extra surface area so that it can get a better grip. Let's let that cool. And we'll come back in a couple hours so that we can work on this this piece here. Now that we've had several hours for this hot glue to harden, let's go ahead and go on with the procedure. This is the same drill bit as I used before, but this time it's in my hand drill. And we just want to follow the hole that we've already made in here as a guide and drill into the sphere itself. Now there's probably some hot glue in there, and let's see if I can clean some of that out. Yeah, not too bad. I just didn't want to melt that hot glue and then get that mixed into the threads that we've already cut into, you know, this piece. Now let's see if we can cut through here. Okay. Now the only thing we have that's left is to go ahead and cut some threads into the wall of the sphere. And I'm going to take a little bit of insurance. I'm going to say you don't have to do this because I did not do this in the first one and it worked fine. But we are about to put a screw right into this joint right here, and then when we try to cut those threads in, it's basically just trying to pry this apart. So I'm going to use this C-clamp. I don't want to try to crush this, but I do want to hold it tight enough that it's not going to be spread apart by the screw. So don't put it so tight that you break it, because I don't know how thick that is, but it's just held well, and it's held nice and tight. So again, by hand, I try to get this kind of threaded in there. I mean, it's possible that we're just cutting multiple threads every time and just weakening that a little bit, but I like to at least think that I'm finding the threads when I'm doing that. And you might want to kind of hold it by this part so that you're not completely going on the glue to stop it from spinning. Although this is threading in quite easily this time. Okay. I don't want it to, you know, shove it down in there. It'll be hard to get out for one thing. That was actually quite easy. Let's see if I can back it out easy. One thing I did not do on this, and I probably should have, and it's something that you can do if you have a hard time getting this to glue onto here, and that is really scuff both sides, you know, scuff the inside of this sphere and the part of this that fits into it. And I mean, be really aggressive with it. I would, you know, you could take like a razor knife and cut some little grooves into it. You could even cut, I can't talk. You could even take a drill and drill some holes into the sphere part, you know, down into here, so that the hot glue can fit, kind of drip down into those and get a good purchase. You could also drill some holes into this piece so that it could do the same thing. The more you can increase the surface area of the glue to grab onto, the stronger that bond is going to be. But now that we have that, we can go ahead and put in our pieces here. Okay, so here are my parts. This piece obviously fits into here, and this piece fits onto the side here. Make sure there's one side has an indentation and one side doesn't. Make sure that the side with the indentation is on the outside. But I'm not going to use these because when I bought this kit, I also was looking on Etsy and I found these. And I'm a sucker for beautifully machined things. So I went ahead and bought them. I don't think there's any need to do that. One of the reasons why I bought these was also I'm constantly checking for scale of everything. And when I can find different people making stuff and they're all the same scale, they all fit, you know, well together, then that just makes me feel a lot better about the size that everything is. But since I have these, I'm going to go ahead and use them. But like I said, there's no reason to buy extra stuff. These would be just fine. Once you paint these, it's going to be great. Now when it comes to attaching these, I think I'm going to do two different things. I think for this one, I'm going to use the hot glue again, mostly because this hole right here is, you know, somewhat larger than this is. So if I put hot glue here and I push this onto there, it'll, you know, come up around and kind of fill this gap fairly well. That'll also give it extra hold. This isn't really a structural piece like this is, but if it, you know, hits something, I don't want it popping off. This one, as you can see, fits pretty tightly and there isn't a lot of extra room. So I'm afraid if I put hot glue in here, it's not going to have anywhere to go and this isn't going to fit all the way inside. So I'm going to use super glue on this. However, I think I'm going to go ahead and do the same things, maybe not for this one because this is pretty much protected. This just has to keep gravity from pulling it out. So I think I'll just stick that in there. This one, I'll go ahead and do what I was suggesting on this one to make it stronger. I'm going to go ahead and drill some holes into here and also maybe some holes into here just to give some more surface area. I'm just going to use this same drill bit because it's convenient and this would be a lot easier on the drill press, but I'm going to try it just by hand here. Let's see what happens. The problem I'm having here is trying to hold this in a way that is secure but that you can see what I'm doing. I can zoom in here. So that should work. It doesn't have to be real deep. And let's try one more over here. Probably should use a punch for this, but I'm just got a sanding stick and I'm gonna make sure there's no burrs. It's nice and smooth. Those could have been further apart, but now I'm just gonna drill a couple of holes into here. Just make sure that there's no weird angles or anything. Everything seems to fit pretty flat. Okay. So I'm going to put the hot glue on here first because when it hits this aluminum, it's going to cool off much faster. Obviously, you won't have that problem if you're doing that with this. So I'm going to start out by putting glue into the holes, and then put a fair amount of glue there. Do the same thing here. And then just looking at to make sure that everything looks as even as I can get it. I could have used more glue. There's still a gap over here. Which means I'll probably have to fill that with putty, but that's okay. Should have used more glue. Yeah, in fact, I failed to fill the gap all the way around, it looks like. And that's where it's going to stay. I'd like to move it down just a little bit, but it still looks fine. And I could go back with the hot glue gun and fill those gaps, but I've learned from working on both the prototype and the jetpack itself that trying to fill gaps, trying to use hot glue as a filler with the, it's okay if it squeezes out into that area, but if you try to fill it into there, you're just making a big mess. Just got my gel super glue. Can't really see with this light, but I'm going to get some on the sides as well as the base. You want this to line up, like the other one that sort of mirrors that there. Okay, too much glue. That's going to be a problem. Let me see if I can wipe that up. That'll be hard to sand away because it actually is slightly recessed. Try to use less glue than me. In fact, it might be better to put it onto the this piece and then put it in there, as opposed to what I did, which was to put it, in the base. And it's a little bit crooked. Well, crooked or not, that's where it's going to live, and that's fine. I don't think that's going to be a problem at all. But let that be a lesson to you. Whatever you can find that will fit into those grooves, get that ready before you glue it in place so that you can make quick adjustments. I was more concerned about getting the super glue off the front or out of these little gaps than positioning it, because it would be harder to clean those out than, this is fine. And you might say we're done, but the truth is this was the quick, easy part. Other than the drilling and tapping of this piece here, this whole thing could be done in a few minutes. But in truth, we've got a lot of work to do on the sort of the finish of this thing before we can go on. So at this point, we're going to have to get our sanding sticks and files and start trying to smooth out everything that we can. Actually, I almost forgot there's one last thing that we have to do. And that is this piece here. It goes in position right there. This is the part that we use the washer for in the other one. Let me see if I can find my little thruster cone. Trying to get that so that you can kind of see what's going on better. There is a little rim all along there that will hold this in place. So I'm going to try to just put some super glue on that ledge. I totally can't tell if there's anything coming up there or not. Sorry about that. Normally I would have stopped filming when the compressor goes off, but I'd already put the glue down, so I needed to get this piece in position. And now I'm just going to hit it with a little zip kicker. And now we have that in there. Now, if you like this effect, but you're doing the other method, I can't really do this, but you can kind of do the opposite, sort of concave versus convex. So here's just something I put together for the other one. It's just 3 washers, each one sort of consistently smaller than the next one, you know, stacked on top of each other, stacked on top of the original washer that we had in there. If that was all, you know, painted gray, it would be a very similar effect to you know, the one we have here. That's just a variable. Now we can get on to sanding and polishing and getting this ready for paint. So the first thing we have to do to this is we have these little sort of bumps. I'm not sure if you can see that on camera. These little bumps here, I'm not sure if that was something that was on the actual prop or if this is just some kind of artifact that was part of the molding process. These were like sprues that came down, but whatever they are, I don't like them, so they've got to go. And I think the best tool for this is going to be the old rotary tool with a drum sander attachment, and we're just going to take those off. And there we go, we just turned it to dust. Now at this point, if you want to continue using the rotary tool to get rid of some of these rough areas, then I would suggest switching back over to that, you know, this bit here, because you don't want, with that drum sander, it's really easy to cut little lines in here. I know Kamui Cosplay and some other people, even working with foam, do a beautiful job of smoothing things out with those drum sanders, but I can't do it. I need to use this. But all that being said, I prefer sanding stick. I can get a little better feel for the curves, and also I'm not liable to, you know, cut into a big divot here. And like I mentioned before, these are pretty rough, so we've got a lot of work to do here. You don't have to do all of that searching and sort of designing on the fly that you have to do if you're making this out of found parts. You know, the actual building of this is straightforward and fast, but it's the cleanup that is a little bit more work on this. We do the best we can on this part, but you won't truly be able to see a lot of this until we spray the first couple of coats of filler primer on here. And then we'll be able to see if there's actually any real gaps or high areas. And then we'll have to go back and sand again. So I've smoothed out this gap, but here's an area, I don't know if you can see it, there's an area right here that the actual surface of the sphere is just irregular. And originally I thought I'd probably have to fill that with putty, but I think maybe I can just sand that smooth. Now when we hit this with filler primer, it may be that we see that this has a big flat area now, and then I'll have to go back and actually hit that with some filler. And I'm just, not only am I looking, but I'm also feeling with my hand for any areas that seem irregular. Got some sort of bad edges down here on the bottom. Let's see if I can't round everything over nice. The material that this is cast from is a nice material to work with. It sands nicely. And it looks like I need to take a file. I've got some rough edges here. I wasn't super successful with cleaning that up on the other one, but I'm going to do what I can. My sanding stick just kind of fits in there kind of perfectly, so I'll start out with that, and then I may have to go back to the small little flat file. Luckily this all gets painted black here, so it's going to be hard to see. Okay, I'm just going to continue going around seeing what I can find to smooth out, and when I get done with that, I'll be back. So I finished that go of sanding, and not only did I go over areas that I felt were rough or misshapen, but I also kind of went over absolutely everything to take the sort of the surface that was there before. I don't know if you can see it on the camera. I left the inside of these because that's going to be a different color, and if it's got a little bit different texture to it, I think that would be fine. Might actually look like inlays of material or something. So I went over everything and just sort of roughed everything up or smoothed it off, depending on how you want to look at it, just to take care of what kind of looks like almost like an orange peel kind of a texture that it had. Also I went in with, like I was talking about before, with this bit here, and sorry about the focus, and there were a couple of lines that I had gouged out when I was using the drum sander, and I can't really see it when I'm trying to film it, so I used that to just smooth everything else nice in here. So now next step is we're going to go with the medium sanding stick and smooth everything out a little bit more. Now I'm not going to go in with the fine because I want there to be a little bit of texture for the paint to grab onto, you know, the filler primer. But now I'm just going to go over everything just to smooth it out a little bit smoother. And once again, I'll come back as soon as I'm done with that. Okay, so I've gone over everything with the sort of medium grit sanding stick. And now I think it's probably pretty easy to see the difference between the two surfaces, you know, the one that's in here and the one that's out here. But before we can paint this, we need to go ahead and go over it with some alcohol, just to, you know, clean off any dust, which I can pretty much guarantee is sort of in all the pores of this plastic. So, trying to avoid the sharp corners. I don't want to pull little pieces of cotton off of this. You don't notice it so much with this as you do with the filler primer because, you know, it's white on a white surface. You can definitely see that it's dirty on that side. So now we're going to have to mask these off so that we don't cover them with primer. So I'm going to give this a few minutes to for the alcohol to completely evaporate, and then we'll go to spraying. Okay, everything should be evaporated away now. And you heard me say spray, but I really meant mask. So I'm just going to put that down, and then I'm going to use that edge on the outside. My thumbnail actually might be easier. Yep, it's actually this. It does help to use your fingernail first, just to find where you're going. Okay. This part should be a little bit easier. Then I'm just going to pinch the top. Okay. Now we can start painting. Okay, and just like we did before, we're going to do 2 very light coats, and then we'll do 1 heavy wet coat, or, you know, heavier coat anyway. And once again, this is the 2-in-1 filler primer. Okay, we'll wait 10 minutes and we'll put a second coat on. Okay, it's time for the second coat. This is going to be another light one. We do want to try to get all the areas. Actually, don't want to get this area. I'll probably go in and sand that paint out just because I want that connection with the jetpack itself to be not only screwed in, but I'm also going to hot glue that. And I want it to be, you know, surface to surface, not on the paint itself. Okay, 10 more minutes and we'll come back and put the last coat on. Okay, it's time for that third coat, which is going to be sort of a medium wet coat. So you're basically going to put it on thick enough that it looks, you know, shiny, but not so thick that it starts to run or sag. To make sure that I get underneath there good. And I'm really starting to see some of these rough areas start to show. I also see some of these areas that have a gap that will have to be filled. Okay, now we're going to wait about 30 minutes for this to completely dry, and then we'll start going in and we'll give it a light sanding, and then any areas that need to be filled, we'll go ahead and do that with the putty. Okay, this could be totally cured, and we can go ahead and start doing our sanding, our smoothing, and also filling up any, you know, gaps that we've got somewhere. But first thing we need to do is to take off this tape, because even though I'm probably going to end up putting another coat of filler primer on here, I need to have, you know, the correct gaps between our pieces here. And if that tape's still on there, the gap's not going to be right. Or even worse, when we take the tape off, it's going to pull some of the putty off. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go after any areas that are very obviously have little gaps, little you know, holes of any kind. And this rough area that was on either side of the seam, I was able to sand most of it flat, but I've still got some sort of recessed areas there that are still quite rough. That still looks like there's not a lot of filler primer there. I'll have to concentrate on that when I do the last coat. Oh yeah, definitely. Even though I had this up on a pedestal and was trying really hard to get underneath there, I think you might want to do a second coat where you actually hold this in your hand and shoot, you know, all that on there. So the first part I'm going to do is these sort of areas that are around, you know, the gaps for this piece and this piece here. Fill those gaps and kind of blend those attachments. And I'm going to use, you know, this one. You could use any of them. I just like the applicator on this. so that I can put sort of a bead around here. I do not like how this putty seems to separate easily. I've used quite a lot there. Let me grab a glove, and then I'm going to start wiping that off. And you could use something like this with a rounded end to kind of shape that, but I still think that my fingers work better than anything. Especially my pinky for this stuff. And just like on the last one, there's a good chance that I'll have to do a couple of layers on this putty. I'm just trying to clean some of that aluminum off. This one I can almost just leave alone because it's pretty good all the way around with the hot glue. I think there's just one or two little spots. Okay, now I'm going to switch over to the Tamiya putty, which I prefer. I just wish it had the same kind of applicator that the other one, you know, the same tip on the tube. I've just got a little stick here, basically. It's a piece of tongue depressor that I've cut into a smaller piece. You could use any kind of spatula type device you want to use, including your finger. Just remember, the more you put on here, the more you're going to have to sand off. And I need to smooth out this connection here. I'm going to try it with the Tamiya just to see what happens. Yeah, that was sort of my fear, was that I'd end up with a huge area, which is, you know, maybe not that bad. We'll see. Yeah, this is going to take a lot of sanding, but we definitely filled in the gap. Now, on the first one I did, I tried to get in here and try to clean up all this roughness down here. And I don't think I was particularly successful, so I'm not going to try it this time. If there was a huge gap, then maybe I would try, but I think it's good enough because, like I said before, that's all those will be covered up in matte black paint, so I think it'll be fine. So I'm going to get that some time to cure, and then we can start sanding. Okay, it's been, I don't know, 45 minutes, so I'm pretty sure that's cured. And it's time to start smoothing. I'm going to go with the medium. I think at this point we're talking with the filler primer and this putty. We don't want to use the coarse stuff or anything. We'll just remove the paint, you know, in a heartbeat. And once again, just like on the other one, I'm not pushing down. I'm just sort of letting this ride over the top of it. And I'm glad we did the other one because that let me know that this paint just gets kind of lighter in color when you sand it, because it was doing the same thing when it was over, you know, that black plastic. So I know that it wasn't the surface showing through the paint. See, that looks like I probably went through the paint entirely there. But there's a lot less paint on this bottom section, so I need to remember that. which is going to be a little bit of a problem because I've got a lot of putty there, but not a lot of paint. Okay, and this is going to be a lot more of this where I just lightly go over everything. I probably won't go over these big open areas, just like I did before we painted, but I think any place where there's putty or something like that, I'm going to go ahead and sand lightly until I can't feel anything. Because you can see quite a bit there, but I don't feel anything with my finger. I can feel a little bit right there, so we're going to work on that. But that's what I'll be doing, and I'll be back when I'm done. So I went ahead and sanded everything as smooth as I could get it. I won't know for sure how good that is until we hit it with another coat of paint. But so everything is sanded smooth, and I've wiped everything down with the alcohol. So I'm going to go ahead and mask these off, and then put 3 coats of paint on it, and I'll be back. We have 3 new coats of the filler primer, and I'm going to do the same thing over again. I'm going to use the medium and very lightly go over any area that looks a little bit rough. All of our seams are pretty nice now. I don't have any problem with any of these seams. I can maybe put a little bit more there, but I'm going to wait and see till after I sand this a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and go over this lightly everywhere, and then I'll be back. I'm going to take a look at it. So I've sanded everything down smooth. As it turned out, there was not a gap that I had to fill over here. It looked like a gap, but once I was able to sand some of the layers of paint down, it all smoothed out really nice right up against here. I will say that I'm having some real trouble with, I don't know if you can see this anywhere, I can still see the seams, especially on this bottom area here of where the 2 halves of the sphere come together. And I think that is because I use the hot glue to glue these together instead of the gel super glue. I think on the last one I did use the gel super glue. I was just concerned with making sure that there was enough glue that would, everything seemed a little bit loose, so the thicker body of the hot glue would be able to fill any gaps. But after this, I think maybe the gel super glue is a better choice if that will work for you. If it doesn't, then you can go to the hot glue. But the other one, let me go back. I think what happens is there's a thin layer of hot glue between the 2 pieces, well, which is how glue works, obviously. But when I sand everything down smooth, the hot glue is more flexible. It's a rubber as opposed to the hard plastic. So you end up with this slight little piece that I can't quite remove. The harder plastic sands down and the more flexible hot glue does not. So I tried several things, and I just, I can't make them go completely away like I was on the other one. And I think that's because I used gel super glue on the other one. So that's something to keep in mind. After I smoothed everything out, I went over it with the very fine sanding stick that gives it that sort of a polish. We've got a pretty shiny surface here now. And I think we're ready to go ahead and paint. I think we should probably take off this right here real quick. Once again, I just have the my aluminum tube with some sandpaper on it. Now, I'm not trying to remove any of the plastic, so I'm going to go very lightly here. And if you have a finer sandpaper, this would be, it might be better to use that this time. Now, just like before, I'm going to go over this with the alcohol. That'll not only take any dust, but I can also use it to remove whatever gummy surfaces on the metal that was left over from the tape. Now this is isopropyl alcohol. I would usually use denatured alcohol, but I apparently ran out at some point, and so I kind of went in and raided the bathroom. Can kind of hold it by the unpainted areas. Oh, by the way, I didn't sand anything on the inside here because I want this to be this sort of matte, dusty texture. I don't think I'm going to paint this one silver. I did on the other one, but on this one I'm going to leave it this color because I think that more sort of sooty kind of texture is going to be better for the inside of the thruster. This is the one that seems to have more gunk on it somehow. I think most of the gunk got sanded off of this piece here. Okay. I'm gonna let that completely evaporate and then we can go on with the paint itself. For this one, I'm gonna go ahead and use the mirror paint as opposed to the Moloto liquid chrome, just because this is what I painted the other one with. Plus maybe you can see the difference in the way this brushes on. I'm almost out of this. I've ordered more, but it takes a while for it to get here. I think this is very much an artisan company that makes batches as they need them. They don't have hundreds of these on the shelves somewhere. And that's all I've got left, so hopefully this is enough. Try to keep this away from the actual aluminum. I think a larger brush does a better job than a smaller brush on this. As you can see, it's not a great brush. It's kind of separating there. You know what I didn't do? I don't think I shook that paint up at all before I poured it in there. Maybe I can kind of mix it up here. I'm seeing lots of little things that I couldn't see before. But at the same time, I'm not terribly worried about inconsistencies in the paint and stuff because, once again, we're covering up almost all of this. I think it's time for me to get that little Lazy Susan real quick. Yeah, I will say that this definitely covers better than the liquid chrome, the Moloto liquid chrome. I used much more of that paint. I feel like I'm going to need to make more scratches and things in the paint on this than it actually has on the prop, just to sort of justify the fact that I've painted this whole thing chrome. But I do like the way it looks. It's definitely got more little bumps and stuff. I should have spent a little bit more time sanding, like I got in a bit of a hurry. I think I was so busy fighting the seam that runs through here that I kind of forgot about everything else. But this is Boba Fett's, so it's gonna have lots of pits and dings and bangs on it. It's starting to get a little tacky, so I hesitate to mess with it too much at this point. Start doing more damage than good. This almost looks like it's got dust all over it, but it's not. It's just where I did not do a great job of sanding and smoothing. It got a nice polish on it, but there's tiny little pits in that paint. If I'd sanded down just a little bit deeper, those would all be gone. But I think it's going to be fine. Now once this cures at least a day, you know how these aluminum, these really shiny paints are, they have a tendency to take, you know, weeks to fully dry, and then they show, you think they're dry, and then they show fingerprints when you put any pressure on them at all. So I'll let this dry for a little bit, and I'm going to put it in my oven at 120 degrees Fahrenheit, which is, I think I've said before, you know, we've had summer days that are hotter than that here. And then I'll leave it in there for a few hours. That tends to speed things up a little bit. Pour what of this I can back in. But once this dries enough that I can handle it, I'm going to go ahead and we can start attaching these onto the jetpack. It's the next day, and the thruster has spent some time in the oven at 120 degrees Fahrenheit, several hours in fact. Plus it's been about 12 hours since we painted it. So I can touch it pretty comfortably without leaving fingerprints or, you know, damaging it too badly. So I brought it out here, but before I finish the video, I wanted to kind of take a look at it, how it's going to be in position. Well, these are a little bit low than where they actually will be, but it's close enough. And it's pretty obvious that I've got a bit of a problem. You see, in all of the photos I have of the jetpack, if you take a line and project it down this edge here, this should be hitting closer to here, with it just sticking out slightly. Basically just this little bump here, or like maybe a quarter of an inch, maybe even a little less, from the sphere, you know, sticking out past this line. And it's not, it's, you know, way up here. So we're going to have to make some changes. For these, it's not that big a deal. I'm just going to have to do some sanding. For this piece here, I think the important thing to do is I'm going to change the size of this PVC lengthwise, and it needs to be only 3/4 of an inch out. Oh, and that's about 2 centimeters. So I'm going to take the same aluminum tube that we've been using, you know, to cut this curve in here, and I'm just going to sand these in to where this is about 3/4 of an inch or 2 centimeters long. So I'm going to make those changes, and we'll take a look at it again. Okay, so here's what you want to do. Preferably before you assemble this, on this piece here, measure from this line right here, which is where this kind of dips in, and then there's a little rounded part right before the end. On that line, measure from there out 9/16 of an inch, or about 14 millimeters, and make your marks there, and go ahead and cut that flat. Then go ahead and sand your curved surface in here, and you'll be in good shape. What I did here was I actually sanded using that tube and the sandpaper, and sanded all of that, which was about a little over 1/4 of an inch, as it turned out. And as you can see from this surface, it took a major toll on, you know, how shiny my silver is. I'm probably gonna have to go back and repaint this once my new mirror paint comes in. All of that before you put this whole thing together, because this was way more difficult than, you know, if you could do it while you're just dealing with this piece here. But with that taken care of, we can take a look at this now. And you can see, if you come down with a line here, it hits right where it should, which is on, you know, this little rounded surface here. Now, originally I was going to go ahead and attach these to the jetpack, but I've kind of decided that it'd be much better to go ahead and paint these and the jetpack separately and then attach them at the end. There might be a little bit of touch up that I have to do after attaching them, but it's going to be a lot easier to do that than to try to get into all these little areas, you know, around here and try to get those good paint job when it's actually attached to the jetpack itself. So with that in mind, I think this is probably a pretty good place to stop. So we can go ahead and look at both the part that we made from scratch or from found parts and the one we made from the kit. And I have to say, I'm extremely happy with the way both of them turned out. You know, the only real problem with this one is the width, you know, of the cone here. And that wouldn't be that way if I was actually using the, you know, the actual funnel as opposed to the just scrap that I had laying around the garage. If I'd used the actual funnel or any of the parts that we found at Walmart when we, you know, found these other things, I think it would be, you know, it'd look a lot more like this one is as far as how narrow this is. And I've got to say, if we'd used those bottles for the soda machine, I think it would look absolutely fantastic, even better than the actual prop. And one of the reasons why I'm so surprised about that is I've been dreading making this particular video. Since we started the build, I wasn't sure how I was going to go about making these thrusters. And that's kind of what happens when you're, you know, looking for parts to put together. You don't really know what you're going to find and what you're going to be able to put together and to use and what the final result's going to be. But, you know, I was really dreading this, and I'm just super thrilled with the way it turned out. In the next episode, we're going to go ahead and add a couple more parts that are a lot simpler than this. And after that, it's going to be all about getting everything ready for paint and painting. We're getting to that part of the build where I get really excited and I have to hold myself back and stop myself from getting ahead of myself and rushing through things. I tend to get a little bit of go fever toward the end of the build, and that's where we are now. Like I said, it's an extremely exciting part of the build, and you kind of have to hold back. Like always, if you found this video helpful or entertaining, like that's going to happen, but if it's helpful, please like, subscribe. I'm pretty sure you're probably already subscribed at this point, but if not, please subscribe. And most importantly, you know, leave a comment. Doesn't matter what it is, just say hi. I mean, if you have a valid question, obviously, you know, or any question, go ahead and ask it. I'll be happy to answer it as best as I can. But just interact it in some way, you know, leave any kind of comment at all. Like I said before, we're getting to a really exciting part of the build, and I really can't wait till the next video. It's going to be a lot of fun. So until next time, thanks.